Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is my amendment, I don't know the number, to strike Section 132, which relates to if a veteran is referred through the choice program to a private physician, that the veteran would continue to, and there's some event that is resulting from malpractice, the veteran would get some recompense from the VA. It's clearly a well-intentioned amendment, but it has a complexity and an ambiguity that is going to come crashing down on a veteran's head. Now, I can tell you some will be concerned that this effectively makes the federal government an indemnifier of a subcontractor, which is a slippery slope which the federal government has always been cautious about. But let's assume that it's a good idea. The bill as written does not include a reporting mechanism. Number one, I can tell you what's going to happen. That someone is not going to report to the VA that they've gotten a large award. They will continue to receive their VA benefit. And after 5 years, the VA will suddenly find out that, oh my gosh, we've been paying $1,100 a month for 5 years, and we were supposed to be collecting it. We were not supposed to be paying it. And there will be a obligatory coming after the veteran to recoup this money. Now, most of these folks will not have the cash lying around. They are going to have to come up with this cash and pay it back. That's number one. There's no reporting mechanism, which is going to lead to a liability for the veteran, which is going to be incredibly problematic. Number two, there's an ambiguity as to what the award is. Let's assume that the award is for $100,000. The trial attorney is going to take anywhere from 30 to 40%, let's say 35%. Is the award net of the attorney fees, or is the award include the attorney fees? Let's assume there's a separate award to the spouse for loss of consortium. Does the VA include the award to the spouse for loss of consortium or not? Now, I can tell you this is going to be worked out, and even if the veteran does report and they're very conscious, but they're making a plan on something, and as it turns out, no, this is included, this is not, it's going to come crashing on his head or on her head. So one, there should be a concern that this is basically an indemnification of a subcontractor, but if we assume that this is a good idea, and it's certainly well-intentioned, then I think we need to have greater clarity as to what is an award, again, net of attorney fees or not. Does it include loss of consortium payments? Is there a reporting requirement, et cetera, et cetera? I would ask that this be struck and at a later point reintroduced with this ambiguity cleared up so that veterans are just not crushed by a VA that figures out 5 years later that they got an award.
Well, let me say this. The proposal's intent is obvious, to ensure the veteran who gets care either at the VA or outside the VA, there's going to be accountability to the veteran for any disability that they incur because of the visit to the private sector doctor outside of the VA or within the VA as well. I know of no reason not to include that in the legislation. I also know of no reason not to consider the possible concerns that are being raised by the senator, distinguished senator, who is a physician, and a good one, I'm sure, from the state of Louisiana. But I do not see, unless my staff tells me something I don't know, where I would go ahead and take it out now. What I'd rather do is perfect it with additional legislation, which we'll consider in the committee when it's submitted by the senator from Louisiana.
Well, my amendment is to strike it.
Yeah, I know. If I might, Mr. Chairman, and I too appreciate Senator Cassidy, I appreciate the amendment, but I think we should work on it. I can tell you right now that the folks that are could be most impacted by this is the disabled vets, and they're opposed to this. They're opposed to your amendment, and I think that you make some solid points. I think that there will be an opportunity to visit with you. We respect your position as a senator and a doctor on this issue, and I think you make some good points. I think you also this drives back to the point that I said that the VA in the end becomes responsible for all this, no matter if we outsource it or not. And so if we can get language to make it more streamlined so the veteran knows what to expect and it's fair and we can run it out and show it to the veterans to get their input, certainly would be willing to work with you on it, Senator Cassidy.
The senator always makes a great point, but if I misspoke, I apologize, but taking it out would be looking the other way from the conversation we have already had with members of the VSOs as well as other members of the committee. So I would want to keep it in. If you take it out down the line, do so with a standalone piece of legislation. Anybody else?
I just had a question for
Yes,
Senator
sir.
Cassidy.
Yes,
So you're saying there's two different standards of care and reward depending on whether it's something that happened within a VA facility versus a community care facility?
Well, if it's in the VA, then obviously the VA is responsible for their employed provider. But the way it currently works is if they refer outside, it's to a civil physician, if you will, it is under the civil system. And if there's a malpractice that occurs, then there is an award from the physician's malpractice company. So this allows dual recovery effectively, in which they would both get compensated from the VA, but they could also sue for malpractice. Now, you could argue that the veteran may be less likely to sue for malpractice because the award will not be large enough, and so therefore a trial attorney will not take it on because they're already getting this guaranteed benefit. And that's actually a concern. And you could also, some would say, trial attorneys would certainly say, that a fear of lawsuits is a discipline upon physicians, if you will, disciplining them to a higher standard of care. And you could argue that this is eroding that discipline, that some physician may say, well, if I have a mulligan, then the VA will pick it up and I won't get sued. But whether that's true or not, under this, the person, the vet, could both get something from the VA and get a malpractice award. But again, as I point out, there's no reporting mechanism, so it could be 5 years later that the VA finds out, and they've been paying for 5 years after the judgment has been made, and they would have to go back and recoup 5 years' worth of payments. And then there's the other things I mentioned as to what is included. Is it net of attorney fees? Does it include loss of consortium payments, et cetera?
Anyone else have a comment or input?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Senator
will
Rowan.
the proponent yield to a question? I'm not sure I understand the harm that you're trying to prevent with this amendment. Are you saying that a veteran who, for one reason or other, does not get treated within the VA system but goes outside of the system where there has been malpractice and she pursues a malpractice lawsuit in the civil side, a tort action, attains recovery or settlement, and somehow the VA does not know about it, and so therefore they can't pursue their subrogation claim? I don't understand what
So
harm
the
this
way
is
it's going to
trying
play out, there's no reporting requirement in the language. So imagine someone gets an award for $200,000 a year after or 2 years after the alleged incident occurs. They get $200,000. They've been receiving $1,500 a month for 2 years. Under the legislation, they are to no longer receive the $1,500 a month until the payments would exceed the amount of the judgment. Well, the VA is not going to find out about it. There'll be circumstances in which the VA does not find out about it and does not act upon it.
Well,
And
does the VA, does the VA even have any kind of a claim on the malpractice?
Under this
side?
legislation, they would hold payments until the equivalent amount of payments, and there's an equal amount of payments to the amount of the judgment. So it's not subrogation per se, but it is stopping payments until the accumulated amount would equal the judgment.
And why would you do that?
Well, that's in the
if there-
that's in the legislation.
No, but why? What is the harm? Because if there was a malpractice and there is a settlement or a judgment, and it may have absolutely nothing to do with whatever the VA payments were to begin with, why would you?
So the
think
VA payments are because of the malpractice incident. That's the under the legislation. That is the reason for the payments in the first place. That there was some untoward event that occurred in
to the veteran?
to the veteran in the private setting from a subcontractor.
And the VA would pay for this kind of a harm?
It sounds like you want to strike the amendment too, because that's what the legislation proposes.
I'm sorry, so perhaps we need to discuss this further.
Yeah.
Is there other, Senator Tester?
Well, I would just like to say that, you know, this isn't unlike Senator Moran's amendment in that I think what you're saying can work, but just striking it doesn't get it to where it needs to go. And so I think a conversation, whether it's a standalone piece of legislation or whether it's in legislation, I would be open to, and get some good folks to the table, yourself, maybe another doc or two and some attorneys, and figure out how to make it work. And I see what you're trying to do. I'm not sure this does it by striking it.
Senator Rounds?
If I could, Mr. Chairman, I'm just curious, in this package that's being proposed and that would go to the floor, I'm assuming with the success of this committee, there's a real high probability that this might very well be one of those products that would move rather quickly through the Senate. And I'm just curious if there's a possibility that between now and the time that it would be acted upon on the Senate floor, would the chairman entertain an amendment or a proposal from the doctor here to perhaps remedy the situation that I think he's legitimately brought up as being concerned? And I think Senator Hirono has hit it on the head that if you've got someone who literally has been injured because of the surgery by an independent contractor and who has then, according to the legislation in the law that we're proposing, would be able to receive benefits from the VA for that injury that's caused by the negligence or the injury during that surgery. To have them find out several years later that their lawsuit that they would have brought against the surgeon actually doing the work was now subject to recapture by the VA seems to me to be something that we probably ought to take a second look at, just so that that veteran doesn't find out 3, 4, 5 years later that they've got a heck of a bill that the VA is now by law required to recapture. And I think Senator Cassidy is suggesting he wanted to get rid of it. Sounds to me like the chairman would like to keep it in, but you'd like to make a repair. Is there a way of doing that between here and the time it's on the floor?
The answer to the senator's question is the same answer I give to every question of his time. I am always open to do business as long as we have business to do. If we don't get this legislation moving now to get it to the House and then get it to a conference committee, it's a moot question anyway. But I've always been accessible and always will be accessible and have those discussions between now and whatever its disposition is before the United States Senate. So the answer is yes, I will.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other member have a question or input? Hearing none, do you want to vote?
It's okay, I think I read the tea leaves.
So you're willing to pass?
We can do a voice vote.
All those in favor of the Cassidy Amendment number 8, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say no. No. Noes have it. Noes appear to have it. Noes do have it. The amendment's not adopted.